Welcome to the Responsible Marketing Podcast, conversations about marketing, sustainability, and how we can all help in becoming more responsible organisations. I'm Jo, a marketing strategist and consultant with a career spanning corporate, small-medium business, and self-employment incorporating marketing and commercial skills in various guises, and now flying the flag for a more sustainable and kind future for all. Today I'm joined by Helen Neal, founder of multi-award-winning sustainability communications consultancy, HN Communications. HN Communications works globally with corporates and NGOs crafting comms to authentically and honestly talk about sustainable business practice and progress. Sometimes a particularly difficult area to navigate with the fear of greenwashing, blue rinsing and social washing, communicating about progress and achievements is important not just for brand reputation and presence, but also to educate internal communities, the supply chain, industry leaders and consumers. Helen and I talk about how HN Communications came about and what Helen and the team look to deliver for their clients, what the biggest challenge is right now for larger businesses, how corporate and NGOs are being brought together for exponential positive impact, kind capitalism and perhaps why it's not quite the contradiction as it sounds like, and what it was like for Helen to speak at COP16 in Riyadh in 2024. Let's dive straight in. Hi everyone and welcome to the podcast. I'm delighted to have Helen Neal from HN Communications with me today. Hi Helen.
Hi, good to see you.
And you. And how are things with you at the moment? It's very sunny here today, so I'm hoping it's sunny with you.
It is not sunny.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It is
That didn't start well.
And overcast. It's one of those like typical British days really, but we've had some really nice summer weather, haven't we? That even though we're in spring, so yeah, I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, exactly right. I know, and more to come hopefully next week. So fingers crossed, it will reach you. So obviously, yeah, thank you so much for your time for a start to come on the podcast. Massively appreciate it. I didn't know much about HN Communications until I obviously was introduced to you. So tell me a bit more about the business, why you set it up, what you're aiming to do, and all that kind of background stuff.
Yeah, sure. So we're HN Communications and we are a sustainability communications agency, sometimes a consultancy. Honestly, I'm not ever quite sure what the difference is between the two because we do consult and we help on strategy and helping our clients solve problems when it comes to communications on sustainability. But we do a lot of all the other stuff that you would expect. So all of the communications, the written, the storytelling, the videos, events, and just the visual communications, all of that kind of thing. That's essentially what we do. And we help businesses and NGOs tell their story on sustainability in a way that is honest, transparent, engaging, exciting, and can also help share the learning and the difficulties along the way so that other organisations can learn and grow from that too. So that's really what we're about.
Yeah, I love the fact you mentioned difficulties there. Not that we want to kind of, rest on difficulties, but yeah, I think that's so important to kind of cover that side as well, because nothing ever goes smoothly, does it? Not all the time. So it's really important, like you say, for learning for other businesses or organisations to understand the difficulties that are faced with sustainability and communicating that more to the point, actually. So when you talk about sustainability, you're not talking about necessarily just the sustainability of the clients you work with, so their longevity. It is all about the kind of ESG or the governance and the workplace and environment, that type of stuff as well. Is that right?
It is. I mean, we primarily, the kind of E, the S and the G, the environmental, social and governance as it's become known. I guess we probably work most in the environmental space. That's probably our main area of focus. So we are not necessarily specialists in the social side or indeed the governance necessarily. Okay. What we help on is looking at the carbon footprint and the impact on climate that the business has in terms of its operation, and equally the aspirations that business has to get to its environmental targets and net zero. We look at how that business is moving along that journey and we help them to kind of talk about that and communicate on that with confidence, really.
Yeah, that's huge, isn't it, having the confidence to do that. We'll probably come on to a little bit about that in a minute, I think. But why do you think it's important then for organisations to do that right now? Why do you think they need to communicate about what they're doing in this kind of area, this space?
Well, there's a number of, I guess, factors that kind of come together to bring almost a bit of a perfect storm for businesses in particular. So there are legislative requirements, and we are seeing it. Obviously, there is a little bit of change that has happened recently over the past 6 to 8 months. But the general trajectory is that there are growing requirements from a legislative point of view that's happening globally.
Yeah.
The challenge there is that what might be happening in Europe may well be different to what's happening in Japan, to Australia, to China, to the US. And if you are a global business, and most of the clients from the business side that we work with are global corporates, how do you navigate and understand the complexity of that legislative environment and ensure that you are bringing all of that to bear when you're a global organization, how that aligns with your strategy? So I think that's one major force and factor that is enabling businesses to really think seriously about what their strategic plan is for their environmental impact.
Okay.
I think there's another force at work which is much more within the consumer space, and we are seeing more and more consumers demanding and expecting from the brands that they purchase from that those brands do the right thing. And that means they're doing the right thing when it comes to yes, people and how they govern their organization. So that S and that G that we spoke about around ESG. Yeah. Also about the environmental impact that they have. So, are the trainers that I buy, going to have been made using, responsible materials? Has there been thought that's been put into how we transport those products? What is the carbon footprint of these? And I think consumers are much more aware these days than ever before, and rightly more and more are demanding that those businesses are much more thoughtful and are having a plan to sort of manage that carbon footprint. So I think that's another key factor that is kind of driving this change. And there are also the kind of long-term sustainability benefit that you mentioned, but in the terms of what is the long-term viability of a business, and being aware of the resources and the products that you use and the supply chain that you use in order to build your products in the first place. Some of those supply chains may well be at risk in the future due to climate risk. Yeah. And so being aware of what that looks like and being able to plan for that is also another factor that is driving, I think, businesses to think seriously about their environmental impact.
Yeah, it's minimising their risk, isn't there, within that space as well. Just on the legislative bit that you mentioned, obviously that if your clients are global, you work globally with them, that's a lot of legislation for you to keep your finger on the pulse of. Do you guys do that yourselves, or do you work with your clients' information perhaps as well and their resources to gain that, and how you can, or what's best to communicate in which area?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we do a little bit of both.
Okay.
So with the countries where we primarily operate, and I'd say we're focused mainly in kind of the US, Europe, and bits of Asia, like Japan and Southeast Asia, for example, at the moment. But as and when we work with clients, we always do a lot of due diligence to understand the political landscape. Likewise, we work directly with those businesses to kind of help kind of build that story together. That being said, we have recently, and I think with the onset of AI, we have been trialling out a new product of our own. So using a lot more of these natural language models now to help build software and programs. We've been in the process of building our own piece of software that is able to match up the legislation of a particular region and understand what the challenges and the requirements are about how those businesses need to communicate on sustainability. And the tool gives areas of kind of risk and opportunity based on the impacts within that particular region for a business. And I think we will see more and more of those tools come online that will be being used by organisations like us, but probably our clients too. We built it because we needed it, and we needed a source to be able to help us understand. But we are realising quite quickly that our clients are also finding this quite useful. But the interface between that technology and actually still having a human there as well within the AI has become quite important we find to a lot of our clients. We did a lot of sort of market research in this space, And a lot of the clients, around about 90%, said that they would use a tool, but they would always want to have human support on it, which I think is quite telling, isn't it? You know, we're in kind of, AI obsession at the moment, and they're all going to take over. But actually, I think when things calm down, we will see how it's really an intersection between the human mind and AI, and bringing that together, and actually exponentially will have a greater value, I think, for the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, on the AI kind of conversation, it's definitely about efficiency, isn't it, and speed. So you guys can get into a market much more quickly for one of your clients, for example, and know that you've got that kind of like backing to do that straight away, and how you start your comms. But yeah, I'm an R on AI, because, you know, the robots might take over, you just never know. But I think you're right. I think the human connection is a massive thing, isn't it? And actually, as humans, inherent in us is community. So actually, we do like the human interaction. And it's a really difficult one, because, like you say, everyone's raving about AI, but equally people want face-to-face or person-to-person contact as well. So it's an interesting place where we are with all that at the moment, I think.
It is. And I think it comes down to, I mean, the AI is only as good as what you ask of it, and what
exactly right.
And so I think as well, that human element is being able to kind of look back at what the data is showing you from the AI models, and then be able to kind of question and help interpret it through conversation with our clients as well. And I think that is the kind of spot that I think we're most sort of focused on.
It's really interesting, isn't it? So just on the, obviously, sustainability, although it's been around for years, like talking about sustainability as it is, it's kind of like, I guess, more and more frequently discussed, and clearly that's your kind of bag now as an agency. So how is that being received? Do you find that clients come to you specifically because they want to talk about those kind of messages, or are you finding that perhaps it's becoming on people's radar a bit more, it's being more populated on people's radars, so they want to talk about it, or they want to interested in how they can communicate it? Where do you kind of get your market, I guess, is what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think there's a few drivers. I think there is one driver that is driven by a lack of confidence. In being able to talk about this topic in a way that is safe. And what I mean by that is that I think we see a lot of businesses who are doing some amazing things in sustainability, and putting a lot of time, effort and energy, and learning a lot from the process as they're doing it, but they're keeping all of that within their organisation, and it's not being communicated. And that actually has a lot of risks. That has risks in terms of not sharing the knowledge more widely within your organisation, so that everybody can learn. And I think conversely, that has issues if you're not sharing that more widely externally, both with investors but also with your consumers, so they can understand what you are actually doing, rather than just talking about commitments. So it's all great to have your strategic plan of, you know, getting to net zero by 2050, but if you can't show concrete evidence of how you are working to getting there, I think you then start to become in a risk position, because there's no evidence to show your commitment. So not sharing that, I think, holds a lot of risk. However, at the moment, we're seeing that comms departments, and perhaps more widely, even up to C-suite, there is a nervousness of how much to share on sustainability for fear of getting it wrong. And people and organisations rightly don't want a spotlight to be shone on them, where they may have inadvertently perhaps not communicated it in the right way. So actually the safer option is to say nothing at all. But what we're saying is actually there's a big risk with not talking about it, because you need to share that evidence as you go. And it's important, you know, I think being able to share the work that you are doing, and there is a great way in which to do this, and totally de-risking your situation, which I'll come on to in a second. But by sharing that knowledge and that learning, you're actually contributing and helping that, you know, there will be other parts of your industry and beyond.
Absolutely.
That we'll be able to feed in, and then we all move forward together. At the moment, we're all kind of still working in this kind of quite isolationist mentality at the moment, often driven by fear.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's the education piece again, isn't it? It's, you know, and the more we can share it as industries and cross industries, then the more confidence people will have. But like you say, I guess you're going to talk about evidencing and stuff like that, are you, with your de-risking?
I am.
Yeah, let's talk about that then. Yeah.
So I'll talk about that, and then there's one other thing I'll speak about in terms of the comms. But in terms of the de-risking, and there are some really simple ways in which businesses can start thinking about this that will very quickly de-risk themselves. So the problem that we have is that businesses traditionally, nothing wrong in this, they're there to sell their product or service. Their communications and their marketing has always been about selling their product or service. So that means putting that communication in the most positive light. It's about promoting that work in the best way possible. That's not saying that you're not being truthful, but you are showing often perhaps one side of things, or you're putting your best foot forward. But this approach, when it comes to sustainability, is not the right way to go about it. And we see time and time again that when traditional comms teams and marketing teams approach the same methodology to sustainability, they inadvertently trip up and they inadvertently often greenwash.
Yeah.
I don't believe that most businesses are not intentionally greenwashing.
No.
I think this often comes through mistake. And often that's because they are choosing the best bits of their work around sustainability and choosing to really only focus around talking about those positive areas and where things have been a success. And like we were saying at the beginning, we really encourage businesses to talk about both sides. So talk about the difficulty and the success, and share the learning. And this isn't rocket science, but we've learned through working with many NGOs that we work with as part of our clients. They do a phenomenal job at this, and they've been doing it for years. They share knowledge about the progress on sustainability. They share it in a way to help everybody learn. So that's sharing case studies, what worked, what didn't, what did we find out, and how do we share that knowledge and learning with a wider audience. And I would always say to any business, if you want to see best practice, go and take a look at some of these NGOs who are doing great work in this space, but are communicating on sustainability in a really, really good way. That's often the gold standard. So we help businesses get to a point where they're a little more comfortable with the difficulty and communicate sustainability as a method in which to share learning, not to sell their product or service. And I think that it's a subtle difference, but it's a fundamental difference that changes your approach and your communication, and it really does de-risk your potential of getting caught up in greenwashing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my industry, or our industry, if I include comms in that, marketing is probably one of the worst industries, because forever we've driven sales. It's all about capital sales and money, and it doesn't really matter what people do with the product once they bought it. Throw it away, buy some more, please, as long as they buy more. So it's a really tough one to not get away from that. And I think originally when I was looking at sustainability, I wanted to really move away from the financial gain for businesses, but actually it has to be there. So therefore, like you say, it's like how you manage that with the advantages of the sustainability. So just on the NGOs that you mentioned, have you got any in particular that perhaps we could signpost any listeners or viewers to, just so they could have a look? Any that popped into your head that would be good case studies, if you like, for this?
Yeah, I think one of my favourites has always been, it's an organisation called Climate Group, but they have an initiative called RE100. And I think it's a good one because there are lots of members of RE100 that are big global corporates, but they have worked alongside RE100 for many years. And this is all about how they shift towards renewable electricity. And it's been a really successful initiative that has helped these businesses and organisations shift from, coal and polluting electricity generation to renewables. And there are lots of great case studies that the RE100 has used and has shown, and I think this is a great way to show successful communication of success, but it also shares a lot of learning in terms of some of the challenges and pitfalls that businesses have experienced through this transition to renewable electricity. So that's a really good one. I would definitely recommend taking a look at them.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm sure there'll be people that listen and watch that will look them up for sure. Yeah. Did you ever imagine you would be doing this for work? I mean, obviously you've been in comms for a long time, but did you imagine that you would have your own agency in this kind of space and talking about this kind of stuff?
I would love to sit here and say to you that this was all part of a grand master plan, but it absolutely couldn't be further from the truth. So I started out actually in political communications. So I worked for a long time in government relations. So I worked in the UK Parliament, and then I worked for some corporates like Nissan and Virgin, where I worked primarily on government relations. So I was never in the traditional comm space, nor was I at all within the kind of sustainability space. That being said, having worked for an airline and then a car company, it's kind of understandable that when you're looking at policy, inevitably and rightly, things are going to come up that are looking at the sustainable and the environmental impact of those two very polluting industries. Yeah. And so as part of my job, I always ended up getting into this space at a time when this topic was definitely in the weeds and not on a C-suite's radar. But I always found it interesting because I think my main motivation, the thing I like so much about work and the work that I've always done, is the ability to help people move from A to B, and B being a more positive, more progressive situation than where they were before. And I think that for me has always been a big interest and motivation.
Yeah, okay.
But I left the corporate world about 8 years ago, when I had 2 children in close succession. And this was, I guess, before the COVID and working from home. And I think the world just wasn't quite as flexible back then. And I found it really hard. And I think, I don't feel like a huge amount has changed, to be honest, even though we've gone through a lot. I think I found it really difficult. I found it difficult to go back. I found it difficult to be the same person I was before. And I felt like my career was flatlining a little bit, if I'm honest. Okay. I also felt that, rightly or wrongly, I think when you often work in a big organisation, you can get quite boxed in. And I really felt I'd got to a point where perhaps others were controlling my career destiny rather than myself. And I think it is these moments in our life, isn't it, whether it's children or something else, that make you stop and think and say, hang on, if I'm going to put my time, effort and emotion into all of this, it's got to mean something. Yeah. And it just didn't mean anything to that degree to me anymore. So I left, and I thought I'd take a year to just think about what I wanted to do. I was at home with my kids. So that's lovely. So that was nice. Yeah. It didn't last long. And then I started freelancing, and funnily enough, I freelanced for the company that I had been working for. So when I said I was leaving, they asked if I would consult. Amazing. So I did. Yeah. And just over time, I found I got more projects, more than I could deal with. And I guess like a lot of freelancers, you then build a bit of a supportive network, brought other freelancers in to work with me. And I really loved being part of a team again. And I also know I've got a lot of areas that I'm not very good at, and being able to then bring other experts in far better than me to deliver on these things, I felt was like a real joy. So I think I probably looked around and sort of realised after about 3 or 4 years, oh God, I actually think this is probably a business and not just me anymore. Yeah. So it just kind of evolved. Yeah, it's good. And still growing, which is great. And you've got an amazing reputation. So, credit to you for that. So, yeah, absolutely. When we talked before, you've mentioned, back to the sustainability side, but you mentioned about how the biggest challenge right now, really, for large companies is probably scope 3. Why do you think that is the biggest challenge? And just explain kind of like a little bit background to why you think that. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with the fact that, there are these kind of 3 areas, if you like: scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. Scope 1 and scope 2 are primarily areas of impact that the organisation itself can control. So this is looking internally at your business and your practices primarily, and then to another extent in terms of your output towards your consumers. But both of those things you have quite significant amounts of control over. When you get to scope 3, that then starts to look at your whole supply chain. So who are those organizations and businesses that supply to you as a business in order for you to operate? And so you can well imagine that as a big global multinational food company, and you start thinking about all of the supply chain down to the farmers in Indonesia who are supplying grain to your product, but it's probably going 3 or 4 times up the chain before it gets into your business. This is what we're talking about. And then when you come to think about how do you map and understand the carbon footprint all the way from the start of that supply chain all the way up into your business, and how do you help those suppliers who are suppliers who are suppliers who are suppliers to map their own carbon footprint so that you can make that quantifiable change. And this is really what we're talking about when it comes to SOAP 3. So I think this is a big challenge for a lot of global businesses. It's a big challenge for all businesses, but it is primarily big business at the moment that are focused on having to understand and report on this.
Yeah, exactly right, yeah.
I think technology and AI will absolutely come into force to kind of help this process. But I think even with all of that, with my comms hat on, there is also a lot of challenges with being able to understand and tell that story. There are risks there in terms of understanding your full supplier chain, what that looks like. I think it brings into spotlight lots of areas like human rights, which probably businesses have absolutely been aware of, but how much depth they have gone into detail because of the challenges that come with not necessarily knowing all of your supply chain.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But I think these are things that are going to perhaps come up to the surface a little bit more over the next couple of years. And I think there's a level of risk and challenge that come with businesses starting to look in this space. But it comes back to this point that we talked about earlier of getting businesses comfortable and confident about talking about the difficulty and the challenge and bringing a level of humility to their communications as much as all of the good stuff. Yeah. And I think it's okay, and we say to our businesses, it's okay to say you don't have all the answers. It's okay to say that you're not there yet, but that you're trying, and that you evidence the way in which you're trying. But it's much more important to talk about it in that way with a level of humility. And I believe, and looking at the evidence, it suggests that when companies are much more humble and honest and transparent, for us as consumers, the level of trust goes up. Yeah. And also as well, you get to be able to own that narrative much more, and you're not living in a way to try and kind of hide information. So I think we do a lot of work with our clients to get them comfortable, show them that it works, and to help them share more information and bring that level of humility of saying we're not there yet, but we're doing our best, and we're working things through.
Yeah, because it's not just about communication, like you say, to consumers necessarily, is it? Sometimes it's about internal comms. So it might be business units within an organisation, or like you say, down the supply chain, so they can understand why you're asking for information, for example, or even maybe just prepping them, saying, by the way, because we all know for a fact if we're in this kind of space, there's going to be legislation that comes for every business fairly soon, like in the next 3 years or so. So again, it's those smaller companies perhaps in the supply chain that do need to start getting their information and evidence there, and then why not take the advantage of that communication again for them as well, because that puts them in good stead for their value chain going upwards, as well as other investors and funders, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah. So obviously you've mentioned about working with NGOs as well. So do you have NGOs as clients, or are you almost like a mediator between organisations or private sector and NGOs, or how does that, just explain a bit about how that works?
So we are both actually.
Okay.
So we do have clients who are NGOs, and we have clients who are large businesses. So we work on both sides, and we love that because we feel that both relationships are important for one another. And actually, we like to sit in the middle between the two, and often we will bring both sides of the coin together. And we feel time and time again when this happens there is exponential gain from all sides when that does happen. So I think what I would love to see is more and more of that happening. I think if we think about how the NGO world and the corporate world have always been, they've been relatively separate, and often there have been times of clash and tension. Now, I think some level of tension is good, and that should always remain. NGOs are there to kind of challenge and hold to account, and that's part of the trust that we have in those organisations. But I think there's also a space for collaboration and collective action. And I think going back to this point that not one business has all the answers to sustainability and the sustainability challenge. And this level of being able to collaborate together with NGOs and other businesses that may even be out of your industry but will have similar challenges to you. If you've got a manufacturing facility, for example, you're going to have similar challenges around energy and heat, just as an example. So bringing these worlds together and getting them to collaborate and work together, I think, does really exponentially benefit the wider movement and output and results when it comes to sustainability. So we really encourage both those worlds to come together and to communicate more together.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I mean, in some ways, I know you're not necessarily talking about social values or social impact, particularly with HN Communications, but I've been talking to two business people who set up Believe Solutions, and they're almost like the middle person between community and so social impact versus private sector. So they're trying to kind of almost come from the other way that it's normally has been. So normally it's been private sector saying, we can give you some money, we can give you some people, whatever that might be. They're going from, well, what does the community need? So almost like, what's the NGO aspiring to or trying to deliver? And therefore, how can the private sector match up with that and actually help them deliver that? And that's really where, like you say, the exponential gains for both then, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the initiative I mentioned earlier, RE100, that was born, and I think it's such a great successful case study for this in point, in that, businesses wanted to transition to renewable electricity. The NGOs wanted business to move to clean electricity, but how do you actually make that happen? The challenge was that there wasn't enough scale for one business to just say, we want to move to renewables. You need to show a level of, scale of demand. And what the NGO was able to do was bring many of these big businesses together and start to show the scale of demand through their initiative to transform to 100% renewables. Yeah. So I think the NGO is often the kind of the driver for the goal, like you mentioned, but it can convene business together in a way that business cannot do on its own. And then suddenly you've got this huge signal of massive demand that can go back to energy companies and say, look, actually, this is the level of demand now that is wanting 100% renewables. We need this as a solution. And I think this is where that collaboration between NGOs and businesses has worked brilliantly. So that is a great example if you want to go and have a look at that.
Yeah, amazing. It just sounds brilliant. And it's nice to actually hear there's some good news stories out there, because we don't often hear about them yet, do we? But hopefully lots more to come as well. Yeah. And I guess leading on from that, you've mentioned before about kind capitalism, which is kind of a bit of a contradiction, really, when you think about it, certainly in the modern world that we're in. Maybe hopefully moving towards less of that, but just explain what you mean by that, and perhaps if you've got some examples, you don't have to name and shame obviously, but some good examples perhaps that reflect, in your opinion, what kind of capitalism is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I'm a businesswoman. I believe in business. I think business can be a massive force for good in the world. I think it's a great shame that in recent history, business hasn't always been the best friend to the environment or to people sometimes, and maybe all of us have been on the receiving end of that, myself incled. But I do think that when business is done in a positive way that is kind, then I think the good things follow from that. And I think the kindness word can also be replaced for things like being responsible, doing the right thing. None of this is rocket science. No. I think it's just sometimes, and profit is important. We're businesses. Profit is the thing that drives us forward and is and enables all of us, businesses large or small, to reinvest and do more, and to offer more services and better services. But I think it has often been abused, and so, you know, we always say it shouldn't be just for profit's sake. Profit is important, but we also need to think about how does what we do impact the planet, the people that we work with, and the customers that we serve, and are we doing it in a way that is transparent and honest? So it does go back to that kind of ESG criteria in many respects. And we're a B Corp, and I think B Corp is another, you know, yes, there is sometimes criticism about any form of kind of initiative, but I think B Corp is a great example of showing how businesses can think slightly differently about what it means to be a business in the modern world, and be a responsible business as well, and still be profitable at the same time. So I think I'm looking for that kind of just a different way that we're having a conversation about what it means to be you know, a good business and kind capitalism, because I think there's a lot of discussion sometimes about capitalism being bad and evil, and we've got to stop it all, and we need a different alternative. And I think actually what needs to happen is that I think it's lost its way, and we need to just realign by just being good people and doing things in a kind way. And I think we'll get back on track, because I do believe business is a great force for good in the world, and it will be the key drivers of the innovation and the changes that we need in order to get to a net zero world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right. I mean, you referenced COVID. I just have to whisper that really quietly, but, you know, I think that showed the kind of like kinder side of business that needed to happen, certainly from a human workforce point of view, if nothing else, you know, that people actually do welcome that and they look for that as well. I'm just going to put you on the spot a little bit, because you mentioned about your B Corp status. Congratulations, by the way. But there's been some kind of like undercurrent recently about certainly smaller businesses. Obviously, I count you as a small, medium business, saying that B Corp shouldn't invite big corporates into their accreditation because there's no way of monitoring them necessarily, or it's more difficult, I should say, to monitor them. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that B Corp status has been slightly tarnished by the fact it's gone out to like much larger businesses, or do you just still stand with it's an excellent status to hold?
I think that as long as the playing field is level, whether you're large or small, then it should be fine. So, you know, I think that the level of, you know, if you're a big business, there are additional levels of requirements on you anyway, outside of the B Corp movement, that require you to report in a particular way. I think what B Corp does is it provides a framework for a business of any size to look at how it's recording and thinking about its operations, and it's being mindful. Much of that, if you're a big business, you're often doing anyway from a legislative point of view. So I think B Corp has always been great for the small and medium-sized business who is serious about this topic and is aligning itself with what is being required in places like Europe anyway for big business anyway. I think it's important for the consumer to have something that they can recognise that has a level of trust in its accreditation that can be pointed to when they're looking at a business. So for me, when I see B Corps, when I see that, I know that there is an effort around the environment. There's an effort around how they treat their people, how they treat their customers and their suppliers, and that there's a level of transparency within their operation. And that gives me a level of confidence and impacts my my buying purchases. Now, that's not the same for everybody else. Other people might have different drivers, but I do think it's important that consumers have these areas.
These markers.
So I'm not as you know, dare I say it, purist about like kicking them out or saying that it's not fair. I just think as long as it's a level playing field, and there are, you know, the standards that we're all having to adhere to, they're doing so as well and are being as transparent as we have to be, then you know, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and let's face it, if they're not being transparent about it, then they're kind of kicking themselves in the face, aren't they? So, they're going to have to carry the can, whatever. So let's hope that they carry on as they are, because it is an excellent status to be able to hold. So, like I say, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Another congratulations was your invitation to speak at COP16 in Riyadh recently. That looked immense. Now, tell me a bit about that, but also what was the experience like for a start, but also how did you feel? Because the press typically, or the media, took that as, or took the angle of, well, it's obviously an oil industry country, so therefore how could they possibly host such a meeting? They're just trying to wheedle their way in. So it was quite negative, I thought, actually, the backlash from the media about it all. What was the actual situation there, and how do you feel about that?
I mean, I was a little nervous to go to Riyadh, I must admit. I've never been to Saudi Arabia before. But I felt it was really important to go. And I feel the team and I always have a mantra of, progress over perfection. So progress is more important than standing on a lofty position of everything having to be perfect before we move forward.
Yeah.
And I suppose I would say that anyway, you can't run a business on that principle of everything you need to be perfect before you try and do something. So I think as well, and I have travelled more and more to that region in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And I find it really fascinating. And the more I've travelled there, the more I find it surprising, I suppose, that perhaps we in the West take that view sometimes in the media, or the Western media, I should say, of, it's a heavily, petrochemical region of the world. We shouldn't be doing anything there, before the other. And I just find that a slightly strange perspective, because a lot of these countries out there now are deadly serious about transition, because they know that long term for them as countries, they need to transition to different methods within their economy.
Okay.
And have a move away from petrochemicals. Now, that is not to say that these are still not going to be significant petrochemical economies for a very long time. But I do think we shouldn't hold any business or country back from trying to do the right thing. So anywhere that's trying to do the right thing, regardless of where it is, I'm all for, and I think we always have to, I like to make sure that everyone is at the table. Now, there's a difference between everyone being at the table, being involved and having a conversation, and us then saying, oh, we will work with a petrochemical company, because we wouldn't.
Okay.
That's a different line. That's about them saying, would we work and advocate for these areas in industry? No, we wouldn't. And also we're a B Corp, so we couldn't, but we wouldn't anyway. That doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be sitting at the table and learning and understanding and helping to challenge and also help driving things forward in a positive way. So if the more discussion, the more openness, the more kind of, movement forward together is always going to be better than pushing people into isolation. But I think that's a very different thing to, some agencies and communications organisations that I see say one thing about sustainability in a positive way, but in the next vein, they're actually taking huge amounts of money from heavily polluting industries. That's a huge lack of transparency. That's a huge lack of being honest and having a one voice set of principles, and that I would absolutely not advocate at all.
Although I suppose there's a case, just to play devil's advocate, there's a case to say that these industries are, I suppose you could term, dirty industries in terms of what we're talking about. So therefore, any support you can give them to make positive impact and change that would be for the good, right? So it's a tough conversation, I think, but I agree. I wouldn't necessarily want to be associated with that kind of industry, but however, we need agencies or comms or just whatever support mechanisms, support supply chains even, to help that industry move along in a more positive manner in terms of sustainability, for certain.
we do, and I agree with you. I think that there is a need for that, and there are agencies out there that will provide that support. But I think where I get frustrated is where I see some agencies who provide that level of support also, on the other side of the coin, try to profess that they are something, therefore but they're not.
Yes, I get you.
Right? So I think
double standards.
Exactly. And I think that's where it becomes confusing and frustrating, I think, for people. So I think it's about owning your lane and saying, like, this is who we are and this is what we're about, and these are the types of organisations that we help, and these are the types of organisations that we don't help. But there are other organisations that will do that.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely. Place for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. Fabulous. So you mentioned, obviously, we're talking about kind capitalism, and you're saying, obviously, you're a business. Clearly, I'm a business. A lot of businesses that I talk to, they are talking, especially at the moment, talking about the difficulties and challenges just keeping their head above water. So then facing kind of sustainability or ESG or anything associated with that, they think comes with a cost, which, you know, I advocate doesn't have to. But how can we, I suppose, I don't want to persuade them. I want them to really be in the space genuinely and, you know, with their own self-motivation. But how do we explain to them, therefore, why this kind of sustainability or ESG and comms to do with that? How can that deliver positively for them financially to help their business from a financial point of view?
I think that in recent years, and I think we are absolutely part of this, we have not done a good enough job at communicating about sustainability in a way that makes good business sense. And I think for a long time, this topic has been talked about as it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's important that you do this in order to be a good business, you know, but that is not enough. And I think, as we've seen with what's happened in the US recently, I think potentially this is going to move the comms side of sustainability on in a positive way, which is surprising because I think it's not necessarily intentional.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm saying is that a lot of businesses, particularly out in the US now, are saying we can no longer talk about it in a way that means that sustainability means it's just the right thing to do. It's good for the planet. We want to make sure that we have a home to live on in 100 years' time that we can hand down to our children.
Yeah.
That type of language has worked for a portion of society, but it has been totally lost on another part of society. And it is wrong for us to assume that that is the only way we should be talking about sustainability. I think the requirements now for a lot of US companies are saying, look, if we're talking about this in any way, we need to show how it makes good business sense, that we are doing this to invest in the long-term viability of our business, that if we do this, it is going to reduce cost. If we do this, it is going to de-risk us as a business. If we do this, it is going to help market our company and our organisation in the right way to the right investors.
Yeah.
So I think, and I think both are correct, by the way. I think actually you need all of it. And I think that we need to do more about having much more of a kind of boardroom style language about how we talk about sustainability making good business sense, as well as being the right thing to do, by the way. So that there is no question, there is no doubt that this is the right thing to do for an organisation. So I think we will see more of that. I'm seeing more of that already in terms of what's, you know, the change in the political landscape. But I think that will grow, and I think it's right that it does grow. So I think making sure that we as an industry within sustainability and communications, we have the evidence and the quantifiable data to prove those points when we are sitting down talking to a C-suite, so that we can have the same conversation with the CFO as we are doing with the CSO. It needs to work across the whole C-suite boardroom. So I think this is something that I think about a lot right now, and something that I think we are shifting more towards and being mindful of as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, when we've talked before, after our last conversation, I went away and had a little ponder, and I've really been pushing kind of like sustainability or responsibility for business through those kind of more softer elements, if you like. And actually, we do need to talk about it from just literally money down to money or financial longevity, whatever it might be. And that's been a bit of an eye-opener for me, thinking, actually, yeah, you can talk about it. It's not a dirty subject to talk about money. You have to be able to do it, because that is, like you said before, maybe capitalism's gone so far and it needs a bit more reining in, perhaps, not being so obsessive about it or portrayed in the manner it is. But it's vital to keep any business going, any infrastructure going. So that's kind of like where we have to go to. So,
and you need those profits in order to invest in those new technologies that will help your business move forward in a sustainable way as well.
Yeah, and your people and everything else that goes with that. Yeah, for sure. So apart from that then, apart from keeping your heads above water, what do you think are the biggest challenges in business right now that you're seeing?
I think I feel like it doesn't matter what time, whether it's now, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10, there's always some form of challenge, isn't there? And I guess that's part of the beauty of running businesses. I think we're always in a position where there's a level of firefighting and change and trying to reassess. And I keep coming to the point where I think, are we there yet? Have we made it? Is there a plateau? And I think I'm realising there never is going to be one. And this is the plateau. It's just constant bumps. That being said, I think it is tough out there. I think it's tough for all businesses at the moment. I think there's a reluctance. I think it's largely driven by a lot of uncertainty, and we've seen that in the global economics recently. And I think uncertainty always brings lack of decision, lack of movement forward. And of course, when bigger companies are holding off because they're unsure and they're uncertain and feeling nervous, so much then comes to a halt further down those supply chains that impact medium and then small businesses as well. So I think we are all feeling that level of nervousness and what happens next. That being said, I think there are lots of exciting things happening. I think, I mentioned about AI earlier. I'm a big believer in AI. I think it has the potential to be an amazing tool for businesses. And we can either choose to bury our head in the sand and say it's going to take all our jobs and we're not going to engage in it, or you can say, bring it on, let's embrace it, and let's see how we can use it to the maximum. And yes, it is going to change the way we run our businesses, and it probably will impact the amount of people that we end up employing in our businesses, but it's not going to completely replace everybody, but it is going to change things. And I think whilst that's an uncomfortable reality, I think it's important to face that reality, because that's the one that I think we're going to be hit with relatively soon, if not now. So I think that is also something I think important to think about, that over the next couple of years I think that's going to have a significant impact on all business. Agreed. And change is inevitable. It doesn't matter how much time limit you put on it or what timeline you put on it, everything's going to change. It's just how quickly you adapt to that, I guess, isn't it? And that's always the key in business, isn't it? Who adapts quickest, I guess, and takes advantage of that. Helen, it's been absolutely fabulous to have you on. Thank you so much for your time. I can't say how much I've enjoyed the conversation, because it's just been an absolute delight, as our previous conversations have been as well. Where can people find HN Communications? And if you want to mention anything that you're doing at the moment, then feel free to. It's your spotlight. Thank you. So you can find us. I'm always on LinkedIn. So Helen Neal, you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm always posting relatively regularly on there, so you can find me there. Likewise, you can find us online, so we're hncoms.co.uk. So take a look at our website. We do also offer a little fun quiz tool which helps, I guess, really give you a bit of a score about how well you're doing on communicating about sustainability right now. And it will give you some tailored top tips based on how you answered, how you might look to improve that score and some things that you can take forward. So that's totally free and you can have a go at that. And as I mentioned about the AI stuff, if you are interested, we are going to be running a trial of our new tool, and it's going to be free for people to trial out and give it a go. And we're just interested to know how people feel about it and whether it works for them and whether they've got any solutions on how we can improve it for them. So we're going to be running a little small trial, probably in the next month or so. So if you are interested, then you can reach out to us on our website as well. Excellent. Amazing. Well, I'm going to go and have a little go at the quiz and see how well I'm doing. I will. I'll let you know.
But thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope we can talk again perhaps in a few seasons' time and see what's changed, if anything, anyway. So hopefully the business world will have settled down a little bit and sustainability will be king. Who knows? Thank you so much again. And thank you all for watching and listening. I'll see you next time. You've been listening to the Responsible Marketing Podcast. You can contact me with any questions or comments by email at joe@jolonconsulting.com or find me on LinkedIn. All recordings of the podcast can be found on the usual podcast channels, as well as on YouTube if you prefer to watch rather than just listen. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe, which helps the podcast to be found by more people. And of course, feel free to share it on your socials, with your friends and your colleagues. That's it for now. So until next time, thanks for listening.